Okay, friends, we're continuing in Daf Hashavua, Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis. So the Mishnah said that if you aser milk, then according to the Tanakama, whey is mutter, and according to Rabbi Yossi, it is aser. So the Gemara is going to ask a contradiction. Uraminu. They ask the contradiction. Minhu adashim, if somebody makes a neder to aser beans, aser or lentils, aser ba'ashishim. He's aser in ashishim. The Ran says, Ramini min adashim aser ba'ashishim. I'm sorry, and the Brisa continue, Rabbi Yossi mater. Rabbi Yossi permits it, which is mamish exactly the opposite of our Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi mater. First, let's see what ashishim are. Ashishin amri b'yushami de'inon tilafchi de megavlan umetagno edvash. Beans kneaded and fried in honey. You thought cholent was good. Imagine cholent fried in honey. That is a winner. That is a winner. Sometimes in these cities in the South, in Atlanta, they have cholent contests. But you know, if they would only know this secret ingredient. So let's contrast. If you aser beans, then the Tanakama holds you're aser in fried beans, because fried beans are also beans. And Rabbi Yossi is mater. So it's a stira. Who is the stira in? The Ran learns, and this is not an authorized Ran. We're not charged with learning this Ran, but the Ran says the stira is in Rabbi Yossi. Why? Well, let's see what the stira is. Why is it when you aser milk, we say whey isn't included, and when you aser beans, then fried honey beans is not included? Well, let's think for a moment. Whey is a separate entity than milk, and yet Rabbi Yossi says it's aser. So certainly fried honey beans, which is beans, they're the same thing as beans, it's just made in a particular way, certainly it should be aser. So that's why it's a steer in Rabbi Yossi. But the Chachamim are good, because the Chachamim say whey is mutter, because whey is a distinct item from the milk, but fried honey beans is aser. But so the kasha is in Rabbi Yossi, the kasha is not in the Chachamim. That's how the Ran learns. But the Gemara then says, like kasha, there's no contradiction in Rabbi Yossi. Marki asrei, or marki asrei. Each opinion is going according to their respective place. Ba'asrei d'Rabbanan kari lechelva, chelva ulekaima kaima. The Chachamim say, in their location, in the place where the rabbis lived, they called milk milk, and they called whey whey. In Rabbi Yossi's location, they called whey the way of milk. So when you aser milk, whey is aser because whey is a kind of milk. They call it a kind of milk. What are you going to say about the beans? So therefore, milk is aser. What are you going to say about the beans? I guess what, they weren't called that? Let's see the Mefarshim. What are you going to say about the beans? In other words, in Rabbi Yossi, the kasha was, if whey is aser, certainly the beans should be aser. So it must be just a matter of... It's a matter of...
It should be the same svara, right? That according to the Chachamim, the reason why it's aser is because they call the beans, both beans are
here,
the same in their...
Let's see. Look in the Rush. 6th line. V'chein ba'adashim ba'asad rabban kari la'ashishim ashishim. Ashishim da'adashim. In the place of Rabban, they called the honey beans of beans. And they did not call it that way where Rabbi Yossi lived. Okay. Tanya, we learned in a braysa, hanoider min hachalav, if someone made a neder not to have milk, muter b'kayim, he's allowed to have whey. Again, that's the shita of the chachamim. Min hakayim, somebody asked whey, muter b'chalav. Min hachalav, muter b'gvina, if somebody asked milk, he's permitted to have cheese. Min hagvina, someone asked cheese, muter b'chalav, he's allowed to have milk. Min haroit, if somebody asked the sauce of meat, muter b'kippah, he's allowed to have the strings of meat. Min hakippah, if somebody asked the strings of meat, muter b'roitav, he's allowed to have the sauce of the meat. Im amar basar zeh alai, if somebody said, I asked this meat, asar bayu v'roitav b'kippah, he can't have it, can't have its sauce, it can't have its strands, because since he asked the meat itself, it's shav yanav shechaticha d'yisura, all parts of it are asar. However, hanodim and ayan, if someone asked wine, mutter b'tav shel sheish by tam yayin, he's mutter in a dish that has the flavor of wine. Amar koinam yayin zeh, any time if somebody said, I asked this v'ine that I'm not going to taste, v'nafal ataychatav shon, it fell into a cooked dish. So then im yesh by tam yayin, if it has the taste of wine, hareza asar, it is asar. Says the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, hanoidir min ha'anavim mutter b'yayin. If somebody asers grapes, they're allowed to have wine. Like you asked, it's from the grape. No, he never intended to aser the wine. Min hazesim, if somebody asers olives, mutter b'shemen, he is allowed to have oil. Amar koinem zeitzanavim elu she'eni toyem. Somebody says these olives and grapes that I'm not going to taste. Aser bahen v'chayetz behem. He's aser in them, and whatever comes out of them, the wine or the oil or the wine. The Gemara is going to have a shiloh. What is it about this case that it's aser? Because we had by the meat. If you said zeh, then you're usher in the gravy. So what is it here that about what you said that you're usher in the gravy or in the wine or the oil? I would have said, because you said these, just like we had by the meat. We had by the meat in the previous Mishnah. We had, let's see, the Mishnah said, but the Gemara is going to have it side. It's not because you said elu, it's because you added she'eni toyem. But there's something about this seifa that not only you're usher in the olives and the grapes, but you're also usher in the juice that comes out of it. Okay.
It's like the two beer slice in the round before when you say ha versus any time.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to have, this is going to be the Gemara Shiloh. Let's see the Ran over here. Hanoidim min ayayin mutter b'tav sheish v'tam yayin. She'ein b'mashmoi shel noidim min ayayin ela kshu be'enoi. Oh, this is what we said, because the implication of someone who makes a neder from wine is only when the wine is extant. Koinum yayin she'eni toyim v'nafal l'tav shom yesh v'tam yayin hariza aser. The kivin the amar she'eni toyim, since he said I'm not going to taste it, aser afilu alidei taroives. It's aser even through the mixture. The kivin sheyesh by tam yayin harehu toyim by. By the way, by the meat case, we say, when you say this meat, then the taste is aser. By the yayin, we say, koinam yayin sha'ani toyim. So we're going to have to see which is the dominant factor here. Amar koinam zeis v'anavim elu she'eni toyim aser behenam chesed. The Gemara mefarish isura I havim misham elu. Is it because you said the word elu, or mishum she'enoi tayim, or because you say I'm not going to taste it? Okay, so let's see the Gemara. V'rakti Gemara, boy Rami bar Chama. Rami bar Chama had a shaila. Elu davka. is the reason why you're usher in the wine or the oil because you said these? Or is it dafka because you said any toyim, even if you didn't say these? Says Gemara, elu dafka. If it's only because you said elu, then why would you have to add she'eni toyim lamali? Why would the Mishnah have to add the word she'eni toyim? So Gemara says that's not a question. Hakamashon, the chiddush is that if you say elu, then it's asur. It's asur when you say she'eni toyim, but if you didn't say elu, it would be mutter even though you said she'eni toyim. Hakamash Malan, the afal gav, the amar she'eni toyim. Chiddush is even though you said she'eni toyim, it's only because you said elu that it's asur. Either amar elu mitzar. V'iloi, if you didn't say elu, it would not be asur. Let's see the Ran. The Ran says, "By Rami Bar Chama, elu davka, or sheni toyim davka." Vaday pshitolei the Rami Bar Chama the bechabi nayu sagi. Rami Bar Chama took it as a davar pashut. You only need one of these factors. Ela de masafkale. What he was in a question about is elu davka, whether these are davka. V'loi sha'ani tayim, whether elu is dafka and any time is not dafka. D'loi mahanya midi, maybe it doesn't help at all. Or she'eni tayim dafka, or that which I'm going to taste is dafka. Ve'elu loi mahani klal. V'hadarle, the Gemara responds, Yisal kedaitach elu dafka, if elu is dafka, shani tayim lamali. Why do I need to add shani time? It could have said the opposite of adinu dahavel matzil meimar nami. If shani time is davka, elu lamali. It picked the first one ala the kamaisi nakat v'adin laidach, and the chiddush is that the afagav the amar shani toyim, even though you said shani toyim, it's only because you said elu I amar elu mitzar v'iloi loi. Umina nami, we could say the flip side, the converse. The ish she'eni toyim davka. If the ikar shani toyim, the reason why I picked elu is it's only because you said shani toyim. If you wouldn't have said shani toyim, even if you would say elu, it would be okay. Hakamash and afgav damar elu I amar she'eni toyim mitzar v'iloi loi. Okay. So now the Gemara brings one raya. Let's try to do this. Amar Rava Tashma. We're going to bring a raya from an upcoming Mishnah. Kainam peros ha'elu alai. I asked her these peros on me. Kainam hein lefidar asr to my mouth. Asr b'chilufan uvegiduleyan. You're asr to what you exchange it for and what grows out of it. In this case, you said elu, but you didn't say shani tayim. But this implies only what you exchange it for and what grows from it is asr, but what comes out of it, the juice, habakayotze behen mutter, what comes out of it would be mutter. Why? Even though you said elu, because you didn't say shani tayim. Now, why would you only be asr in what you exchange it for and what grows out of it, but not what comes out of it? Because maybe I would say what comes out of it is mutter. You know why? Because the item itself that you asred becomes diminished and squeezed and small, and it's affected by what you do to get the juice out. So maybe that would be mutter. That's more permitted than what it's exchanged for. You see, when you exchange it for something, the item which was originally asur is fully extant, or what grows out of it, the item which was originally asur is fully extant. So it will be medaik. Only that's asur, but what you squeeze out of it is mutter, because when you squeeze out of it, you squeeze the living daylights out of the original thing that was asur, so it's not the same anymore. So, to which the Gemara answers, no. The Gemara says no. The Gemara says, no. The same thing would be even what comes out of it, it's asur. Then it should have picked the bigger chiddush, that even what comes out of it's asur. No, that's a smaller chiddush. Obviously, what comes out of the etzem isur would be asur, because that's coming out from the item itself. That's part of the item. The juice of the olive, the juice of the grape, is part of the thing itself. That goes without saying it's asur. But maybe you would think that something you exchange it for, something that grows out of it, is not coming from the thing itself. I would think that's mutter, so the chiddush says even that's asur. So the havamina was that it's a bigger chiddush that the juice would be asur. So why didn't it say it? It must be because it's not true. And the Gemara says, no, it's a smaller chiddush. Let's see the Ran. Amar Rava, Tashma, Kainam, first, a second wide line. Kainam Peres Elu Alai, Habek Yotzehen Mutter. The Sakadaita, the Yotzem Asur, the Gemara thought that if what comes out of it is asur, Tfei Havarabusa, it would be a bigger chiddush. The Lashmeinan, to teach, the yoytze mehen asur, what comes out of his asur shenishtanis tzuras haperos, that the image of the pera, of the fruit, changed. She'asar alav. That's a bigger chiddush than michilufen v'gidulen, than what you exchange it for, what grows out of it. Shadain hi kayemis, it's still extant. Umapichle, and the Gemara flips it. The adarabah ha adifalei lashminan. What you exchange it for, what grows out of it, is a bigger chiddush. The chilufein afli shel yotzim migufa isser, what you exchange it for, even though it didn't come out of the isser itself, kegidulei andami, is like something that grew out of it. But koshikein yotzim, certainly what comes out of the item itself, sheyotzim migufa isser mamish, that's for sure asur. Now the Ran's bothered. Uvedinhu dehabamatzi lemifshat boyin mimasnisa the Tanya Lael besamach v'im amar basar ze alai asar bay uveroitvay uvekefay. We said in a brisa earlier if you say basar ze alai, you're asar in the juice. We had that brisa about 10 lines down. So why don't we quote that brisa? Because when you say alai, when you say zeh, even though you don't say shani toyim, the juice is asur. The answer is, we'd rather quote from a Mishnah. We're about to quote, I would guess, are we about to quote a Mishnah, or this is the Mishnah? Because the lashon of the Ran is we'd rather bring the proof from a Mishnah. I guess the Mishnah that we're about to quote. Okay, we're going to hold it over here, Rabbi Isai. Thank you very much. Have a good night. Kol tov, bracha v'atzlacha. Kol tov.
Recording stopped.
Okay, good evening, Rabbi Isai. We're continuing in Daf Hashavua, Nun Beis Amud Beis. Yesterday we began the Shaila of Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama wanted to know that in the Mishnah discussed somebody who made a neder, Hanoider min ha'anovim. If you made a neder from grapes, you're permitted in yayin. Min ha'zeisim muter b'shaman. But if you say koinam zeisim anovim elu she'eni toyim, if you say these olives and grapes that I'm not going to taste, you're asur in them, ukiyotzei bahen. You're asur in them, and what comes out of them. You're usher in the olives and the grapes and the wine and the oil. So Rami Bar Chama had the following shaila. We'll read the shaila inside, and we'll go to. We'll read the shaila inside. Boy Rami Bar Chama, Elu dafka, oy she'eni tayim dafka. What is the critical ingredient here of why, if you say this formula, you're usher not only in the fruit but what comes out of it? Is it because you said these, and eni tayim is not critical, or is it because you said eni tayim and elu is not critical? Yesterday, and this is going to be appendage to yesterday's recording. Yesterday, we learned that the Gemara in the Havamina felt that there are two byproducts of fruits. There's what you exchange it for, or what grows out of it, or what literally comes out of the fruit, the juice of it, right? So in the Havamina, the Gemara thought that it's more likely for something that you exchange it for to be aser, because when you exchange it, the item itself is completely extant, right? The item itself is still there, is unaffected. Masha'en kain, if you squeeze it, so you basically tzishmeter the item, and perhaps then what comes out of it should be mutter. And ultimately the Gemara said no, only chilufein v'gidulein is mutter, because it doesn't come out of the item itself. But only chilufein, but because we had a brisa, if you say kainim peres ha'elu alai, kainim helafi, you're aser b'chilufein v'gidulein, and the Gemara said, okay, for sure you're aser in what comes out of them. Okay, so we're up to the tashma she'eni oicha v'she'eni tayim. Okay, we're up to tashma she'eni oicha v'she'eni tayim. We're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 lines from the bottom. Tashma. Come in here, she'eni oicha v'she'eni tayim. I'm not going to eat, and I'm not going to taste. Mutter b'chilufein u'v'gidulein. You're mutter in what you exchange it for, and the gedulen, which is interesting because we just had a tashma before. If you say elu, you're aser. If you don't say elu, you say she'eni tayim, you're mutter. So right off the bat, you see that elu is much more effective than she'eni tayim, which should indicate that the critical ingredient is the elu and not she'eni tayim, right? But we're going to see that. We're going to see in the Ran. Here we have a case tashma she'eni oichel v'she'eni tayim mutter b'chilufein u'v'gidulein. You're permitted in what you exchange it for and what comes out of it. What grows out of it. But that implies hayoytze mehen aser. Now we're assuming, based on the way the Gemara ended, that what comes out of a fruit is more likely to be aser than what it's exchanged for. Hayoytze mehen aser. So says the Gemara. So that's a raya that elu is the critical ingredient, because if you would have said elu, hayoytze mehen is aser. So it's a raya, the critical ingredient is elu. No, I'm sorry. In this case, you said she'eni oicha v'she'eni tayim. So we see, if you say she'eni oicha v'she'eni tayim, that what comes out of it would be aser. So what do we see from here? That it's the she'eni oicha v'she'eni tayim that creates the iser. Because we just had koinim peres elu alai, koinim hein lefi, aser b'chilufein v'gidayan, and then we wanted to medayek what comes out of it should be mutter, and then that would indicate that alai doesn't do it. You need she'eni oicha v'she'eni tayim. So Gemara said no. Even what comes out of it would be aser. Even what comes out of it would be aser. Now, at that point in the Gemara, what would the chiddush be? What would be the critical ingredient? I guess it would be indetermined. But now we're saying, if you say she'eni oicha v'she'eni tayim, Meaning, in the case before, where you said Elu, and the Gemara wanted to say that Elu would not aser, right? The Gemara had a havamina that b'kiyoytse bahen would be mutter. Ha b'yoytse mutter, that means Elu would not aser the kiyoytse bahen, b'yoytse bahen. And the Gemara says no. Could be Elu would aser, and it didn't want to say Elu because it wanted to say a bigger chiddush. Now we're saying the flip side, because we're saying chilufein gidulein is mutter, but hayoytze mehen was aser. So we see the critical ingredient that she'eni toyim is what asers. So says the Gemara, no, the truth is, really, even if you said, what comes out of it would also be mutter. So why don't we say a bigger chiddush? Why don't we say a chiddush, even what comes out of it is mutter? Since in the Reisha it didn't say yoytze bahen, because in that case it's for sure aser by Elu. So then, in this case, it didn't want to say mutter by yoytze behen. Loi nasiv nami b'sefer yoytze behen. It didn't say in the sefer yoytze behen either. But what we're basically saying is that by Elu yoytze mehen would be aser, and by eni oichel v'sheni tayim yoytze behen would be mutter. So the Ran is bothered. So then we see off the bat that Elu is the critical factor. Look in the Ran. Tashma Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Ela ba'elu loy kami ba'ilan. Ba'elu we don't have a shaila.
Isn't Tayyim the critical factor, not Elu?
Right now? No, because basically at this step in the Gemara, we saw that if you say Elu, yoytze mehen would be aser. And if you say eni toyim, it would be mutter. So that means Elu is much more effective than eni toyim. Because at this step in the Gemara, we're saying really, if you say eni toyim, yoytze mehen would be mutter. So why didn't it say that bigger chiddush? Because since it didn't talk about yoytze mehen in the Reisha, it's not going to talk about it in the Seifa either. But that means that Elu is much more effective than yoytze mehen. Elu is more effective than any time. Look in the Ran. Tashma Amar Rabbi Yehuda. I'm sorry. Tashma she'eni oichel ha b'yoytze mehen aser. Di yoytze mehen mutter. If yoytze mehen is mutter, vadei legabi she'eni oichel she'eni tayim haravusa tvei shar yusa. Di yoytze mehen mishar yusa d'chifem ugdilayim. If yoytze mehen is mutter, then it should have said that case, because that would be a much bigger chiddush, that even yoytze behem is mutter by chilufan and gidulehem, like we wrote earlier. Really, it is a bigger kula that yoytze behem is mutter than chilufan. So why didn't it say it? The reason, since in the Reisha didn't say yoytze mehen, because it wanted to pick a bigger chiddush in the Reisha, mishum the isur de chilufan have rabusatfei, because the isur of what you exchange it for is a bigger chiddush. Lo nasiv seifa yoytze mehen. Okay. So at this point in time, l'chayra, we should have been successful in proving Elu is the critical factor, because we see Elu asers ki yoytze behen, b'yoytze behen, and she'eni toyim v'she'eni oichav v'she'eni toyim does not. So let's see a little bit further. Tashma. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Maisa va'asa Reb Tarfon alai beitzim shenas mashal imay. There's a story. Reb Tarfon aser on the eggs that were cooked with it. Amrulai, they said, Emasai. Okay, when did he aser? Bizman she'amar basar ze alai. When you aser this meat. Sha'anoidim min adavar min asar ba'acher. Because when you make a nether from something, it got mixed with something else. V'yesh b'ay b'noisein tam, harei zeh aser. When you make a nether from something, it got mixed with something else, and it's noisein tam, it's aser. So we see that when you say elu, it asers what comes out of it. So therefore, the Gemara concludes, "Be'elu loy kami bailan." If you say elu, there's no shaila. It's obvious that it will aser what comes out of it. The davkahu kimi bailan b'she'enei toyim. The shaila would be eni toyim. Davka or lav davka. Is that specific or not? What does that mean? Is it specific or not? Meaning we know elu alone would aser yotzei by. The question is, would also eni oichav einatom, would that also aser? Look in the Ran.
Didn't we say before that that is the chiddush? The chiddush is that if you just say any time and you don't say elu, then it doesn't answer it.
Where do we say that? The Gemara, that was the Gemara Shaila. Now we're saying there's no Shaila by elu. Elu for sure, it would aser what comes out. The Shaila is, what if you just say she'eni time? Right.
The Gemara says that the chiddush is even if you say any time, if you don't say elu, it's not aser. Meaning that.
Where did the Gemara say that? The Gemara had a shaila, which is the critical factor. Now we're saying elu alone could aser. But
the Gemara says the whole chiddush of why you even need any time in the Mishnah is that if you didn't say elu.
No, the Gemara is just explaining that if you take the tzad that elu is davka, then the reason why it says any time is to indicate that if you didn't say elu,
now that elu is pashut.
Now we're saying elu definitely would do it.
Elu. If elu is pashut, then the Mishnah could have just said any time, and we would know elu kal v'chaimer.
We would know a kal v'chaimer. Well, how would I see that from
the Gemara right now? We're saying elu is pashut.
Now we're saying elu is pashut. Elu alone would for sure do it. The shaila is, would any time alone do it? So you're saying if it would, then why didn't?
We need elu in our Mishnah, yeah.
Okay, lav dafka. I don't know if that's a full-fledged proof. Tashma. Dagim she'eni tayim. If a person says a fish or fishes, then I'm not going to taste. Asr behen bein gedolim bein ketanim bein chayim bein v'shalom umutar b'taras trufa. You're allowed to have chopped up fish, ubetzir, and you're allowed to have the juice of the fish. Now, in this case, you say any tayim, and yet you're mutter with what comes out of it. You're mutter with what comes out of it. So Zaraya, any tayim, is not a critical factor. So no, the Gemara says no. Amarava uchvar yatsa mehen. When the Mishnah says you're mutter in what comes out of it, it means what already came out of it before he made an eder. But maybe what comes out after. Maybe if you say any tayim, so you aser this thing, then what comes out would be an issue. Amarava ukvar yatsa mehen, says the Gemara, says around la'olam she'eni tayim nami davka. Rava said, ukvar yatsa mehen la'olam she'eni tayim nami davka. Maybe any time alone would do it also. V'iyatsa la'achar mekan ena achanami daser. If it would come out after, ena achanami would be aser. V'chitnan desharyan, when we learned that it's mutter, b'kshvar yatsa mehen kaidam nidrai, when it already came out before the nedar. So you're asking, if you're going to say that elu alone does it, Isagdal elu davka, why would the Mishnah have to say she'eni tayim? Well, again, the Gemara before was assuming Elu is Dafka and any time is Ene Dafka. And the Chiddush was that any time doesn't work. But you're saying if any time does work, the Gemara never really discussed that possibility. What if both of them work? The Gemara never right? The Gemara actually never discussed. Well, if either works, so why does it have to say both? I don't know the answer to that, but it's not like the Gemara discussed that possibility. Okay, that is Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis.
Recording stopped.